Sports reports, no gimmicks, no clowns. 2-5, Mr. Logical, we run this town. Real talk only, no chasing, no doubt. From the east to the west, it's the order we shout. Mic check, lights flash, game time, stay ready. 2 vets in the zone, keep the pressure real heavy. Big hits, big plays, yeah, we breaking it down. Truth rings in your speakers, every word is the crown. From the north side hustle to that southern flame. Midwest grind, west coast of the game. Sports talk kings, yeah, we wear that crown. Turn it up, let them know it's about to go down. Sports reports, no gimmicks, no clowns. 2-5, Mr. Logical, we run this town. Real talk only, no chaser, no doubt. From the east to the west, it's the order we shout.
It's about to go down.
Yes. It's a beautiful Friday night. Welcome to Sports Reports as Ordered. Those are the sounds that you're hearing, brought to you by the one and only world famous, world renowned. He's known as Mr. Logical.
Yeah.
Down here in the Alamo, I am your resident statistician, unorthodox style. I go by the name of 2-5. Like, review, share, subscribe, rate, do all the free things, do all the good things, liquid death in hand. And let's talk some ACC.
Mike's about to be in his bag.
College football is upon us. You know, before you blink, we're about 44 days away or so. So, Mr. Logical, just to recap a little bit last year. So, you know, last year, of course, Virginia finished 7-1 in the ACC, first place. And then you had Duke, Miami, Pitt, SMU, and Georgia Tech, all 6-2. Somehow, 5-loss Duke gets into the title game. This Duke team that lost to Tulane, by the way, that lost to UConn, by the way, plays for the ACC title. And wouldn't you know, we talked about it. Wouldn't it be so funny if Duke won this game? And what did they do?
That was the last game, too, right?
Yeah,
that was the last.
Yeah, and they went to overtime. They won, but you can't let a 5-loss team in the playoff. So throughout the rest of the country, you know, Alabama lost their conference game, title game, got in. BYU didn't get in, even though they lost their conference title game. So now you had this whole head-to-head between Miami and Notre Dame. What are we going to do? Because Virginia's got 2 losses. They made the championship game. But you just lost to the 5-loss team. So Miami got in. So reflecting back, everything that we know now, obviously hindsight is on our side because Miami made the national title game. Would you have put Miami into the playoff last year?
I would have had Miami over Notre Dame anyway, simply because everything about how the season played out, when you broke it down, everything was so similar. The teams they lost to, the teams they beat. The head-to-head was, that should have been option A, plan A, priority number 1, 1 alpha 1, whatever priority level, that should have been the same thing because everything else was a wash. The only thing you could point to was the head-to-head matchup. So having Notre Dame ahead of them this entire time was a facade to me. I thought that was fugazi because it's like, what are we honoring here? And I understand with Alabama kind of getting the benefit of the doubt a lot of times because they play in a tough conference. But there's other things. It's like a couple years ago, it's like, well, LSU, or it was like when it was like Ole Miss, South Carolina, and Alabama, they all had like 3 losses. But they all had like 3 very different circumstances for their losses and then the win. So it's like it was kind of hard to kind of decipher that. Miami had the head-to-head win over Notre Dame. That was it. So I don't even know why they had the whole song and dance of having Notre Dame ahead of them at all.
Well, that's why it was funny the year before because you mentioned South Carolina. They had lost to both Ole Miss and Bama, so I don't even know why they were in the conversation to begin with. But they
just used the whole SEC stuff, and like that was like all you need is an argument. Like as long as you can prove your argument. And you can win that. That's all that matters in those kind of situations. Like, can you prove your argument? Can it benefit you if you prove your argument?
Yeah. So you had this situation play out I thought BYU was the one that got screwed because they lost their conference title game to Texas Tech. Their only other loss on the season was to Texas Tech. And if you want to let the loser of the conference championship game in, okay. But if I'm going to penalize Virginia for losing to a 5-point team, to a 5-loss team, shouldn't I also give Alabama a demerit for losing by 21 in the SEC title game? Just a thought. But anyway, so now we come back to this season. The SEC and ACC were the only conferences, Power 4 conferences, that didn't have a 9-game conference season. That changes this year. But you might say to yourself, how does the ACC do that? They have 17 teams. Well, let me tell you, 5 teams, 5 of them are playing 8 conference games still. So that would be Boston College, Clemson, Florida State, Georgia Tech, and North Carolina. They're all playing 8 games this year. Everybody else is playing 9. So then you might say to yourself, well, how does the tiebreaker work? You know what I mean? Like, what if I have an 8-1 team, but then I have a 7-1 team and, a 7-2
8-0 team.
8-0 team. Like, how does that all shake up? So this is what the ACC said. Head-to-head, as Mr. Logical said, will be the priority. Teams will not be penalized or credited based on the number of ACC games they play. So if you played 8, we're not going to penalize you because you played 1 less game. If you played 9, we're not going to give you credit for playing the extra game. So what's going to happen is...
How can you do that if somebody goes 8-1 and 8-0? Like, there should be credit for going 8-0.
I know, but
right?
if there's a 7-0, then we got to talk about it. You know what I'm saying? Or I'm sorry, if there's an 8-0, no, it would be the other way around. It would be
so if you go 8-1, if you're 9, you got a team that
what if you go 8-1 and the other team, or I'm sorry, what if you go 8-0 and the other team
goes 8-1, and it's like, well, there has to be some kind of for use your word, Air Force base training word, demerit, or you got to give credit to the 8-0 team. Like, so I think,
but see, the problem is that's chance though. Like, it was just chance that this team ended up with the extra game.
But it just happened. They just had a problem with the tiebreaker.
Well, see, we were talking
ago.
Well, we were talking about this, right? Because Bama got into the playoff because they're a name. They're one of the biggest brands in sports. So what happened the first year of the 12-team playoff, we can't leave Bama out again, just off of who they are and what the name does. So this is what they're doing in the ACC, right? They had to put Miami in, which worked out for them, but you never wanted Duke in the ACC championship game to begin with their 5 losses. So what they're going to do is they have a group called Sports Source Analytics, and they're going to run analytics to tell us who should win the tiebreaker based off of strength of schedule and all those type of things. Yeah, so that's the ACC, and this is why the ACC is going to fail, because right now they've at least built out these schedules until 2032 where teams play, 8. The 5 teams will play 8 conference games. It won't be the same teams every year. But then I had a thought, Mr. Logical, and I said, well, by contract, Notre Dame has to play 5 ACC schools every year. So why not have those 5 schools play Notre Dame and just count it as a conference game? Like, you don't have to count it for Notre Dame, obviously, but Notre Dame is an ACC member in all other sports. They joined the ACC during the COVID year and made the conference title game. So why not just have the 5 teams that are going to play 8 conference games play Notre Dame?
Where's the ACC headquarters?
Charlotte.
You think about finding a job in North Carolina? Because I think that's like every time we've talked about college football, you've offered up a better solution to fix their problems. Every conversation we had. So just that alone, if you're going to designate 5 teams to play 8 games, but yeah, no brainer. Make Notre Dame play those 5 teams and count it as your 9th de facto game. even if you don't use it unless a tiebreaker comes about.
Right.
You just keep it in your back pocket.
So what I don't like is that I think it's one of these overcorrections where they're just going to put the team in the title game that they want in the title game.
They have
you know what I mean? And
they're a poorly structured conference as is. So they can't afford. They were fortunate enough that Miami was as good as they were last year because the way the caliber of teams they have in the ACC and how poorly it's constructed, they need a 12-0 team. They are old blue blood schools and everything else, but they need an undefeated team. They're probably teetering around the Big 12 level of respect on the college football landscape as far as like you're not getting two teams in, and you better have a juggernaut that we can sell, because if you get a 10-2 Louisville and a 9-3 Alabama this year, and it's a toss-up, they're not going to put that Louisville team in because the poor team that they have in the ACC. You're going to go through the preview, but they need to handpick their champion to ensure they get an opportunity to get a grab at that cash that's available through the college football playoffs.
And if you listen to everybody around the nation, podcasters, ESPN, whoever your choice is, I think they're banking on Miami to go 12-0. Like looking at the ACC odds, Miami is minus 136 to win the ACC title. In second place is SMU at plus 700. So Miami is far and away. And why not? They paid $10 million for a quarterback, right? So theoretically.
That's the thing. Two bad tip passes leads of points. A guy out of position defensively. College football, we've seen it happen year after year, conference after conference, where it's like some of these teams on paper should go 12-0. We've done these previews for like 3 or 4 years now, to where we get to the end and I'm like, listen, I know I picked this team to go this, but it's like there's no way they're going 10-2. Like there's a couple losses in there, and we had some of the French. Sometimes we have conversations about Colorado. We're always optimistic, but once you got to get realistic. Like there's going to be a game where an underdog beats them. So Miami, yeah, you're predicting to go 12-0, but it's going to be one of these teams that's either a bad matchup or it's a bad day for Miami, and they're going to slip up to the North Carolina State's going to catch them. Like it's going to be one of those games where they lose to a team that they should be outright.
Well, here's the fact of the matter. Miami joined the ACC back in 2004. They deemed it the All Canes Conference. Miami, to this day, has not won an ACC championship. So then when you peel that back to last year, they made the national title game. The U is back. But you know what they did? They lost at home to Louisville, because they couldn't stop turning the ball over. They lost in overtime down at SMU. So the only reason they got in the playoff was because Virginia blew that game against Duke. So it's not a given that Miami's going 12-0. And I'm not saying that just because I'm wearing this jersey. It just is what it is. Like, what I'm saying? So taking it from the top here, they get off to a good start. They got to be 4-0. Looking at this early season schedule. You know what I mean? The problem is
Stanford, Florida, FAMU, Wake Forest, and Central Michigan.
Yes.
Am I reading that right? Okay.
You're reading that right. And and that's where, like the schedule has the ability to start off there. So the home games are the white. So they're at Stanford to start the year at the Farm. They go to Wake early, but then after that Central Michigan game, they got to go to Death Valley. Now, one thing about Clemson, we know Clemson has talent, and they will have talent. Now we just got to see if they can put it together because they're coming off of a 7-6 year. New quarterback coming in this year, new running back, lots of defensive losses. So I'm going to give Miami that win for now. Then they get Florida State after the bye. You got to give them that just because they're coming off the bye. So, but I will let you know.
Or is that your trap game?
No, it's not a trap game. It's the rivalry game. I don't think rivalry game can be your trap game.
But coming off the win against Clemson, which I think is probably going to be, I think Dabo Swinney's apprehension about using the transfer portal and just kind of seeking out talent. He's like, he gets guys he likes, but I don't think he really goes out and gets like the best players at every position. I think he kind of puts guys out there. He's like, hey, I like this guy. He's scrappy, whatever. But you beat Clemson. You're 5-0. You're doing all the interviews. You have the off week. What is that?
That's
early mid-October.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Homecomings, parties, and then you come back. You got Florida State at home.
Yep. And that's what I was going to say. Florida State all time. Now, I know this ain't relevant to today, but it is a fact. They have a winning record against Miami at Miami. They have a losing record at home against Miami. So a guy like me, I'd rather the game be on the road. I'd rather not have the pressure. I'd rather not be looking at field goal kickers. You know what I mean? So, that's where we're going to go with that one.
That's your real PTSD.
Yeah, it really is. And by then, Florida State may have quit, depending on how, because they start off with, Central or New Mexico State. They start off with New Mexico State. Then they get SMU at home on Labor Day night. Then somebody had the bright idea, let's send them back to Bama. Which we know that, we were going to get the return match because Bama came to Tallahassee last year. But did you have to put it right there? You know what I'm saying? But you'll see when we get the Florida State schedule. This is nuts.
Get out the way early, yeah.
This is nuts. So with Mike Norvell's job on the line, it makes you wonder, is he going to make it through the season?
Is he coaching that game against Miami? Yeah.
Right. And they just hired Tom Herman as the assistant 2 days ago. And looking at these ACC odds, I'll give you a guess. So I told you Miami's minus 136. SMU is plus 700. Where do you think FSU is?
Plus 1,300.
Plus 3,500.
Woo.
3,500.
Put 100 on it.
You know what I'm saying? But anyway, so Miami continuing through, Miami's schedule here. They get the Florida State game. Then they get Pitt at home. They get Belichick. And then you see what happens after that. They got to go to South Bend. And you don't think that Notre Dame is going to be frauding and chomping at the bit to get a hold of Miami.
Revenge on the mind.
Yeah, so that's your loss right there. Is Notre Dame. Then you get Duke. Watch out for Virginia Tech. Watch out. That's all I'm going to say. I'm not calling it. I'm just saying watch out. You know what I'm saying? James Franklin in the house. But let's talk about Miami for a second. So Mario Cristobal, we've been talking about him for a couple of years and his game management, his decisions with the game on the line. So he went out and got him an analytics guy that basically holds his hand on the sideline and, lets him know, hey, punt this. Hey, go 4th and 1, go. So we'll see how that works out. He got into the national title.
Analytics say punt? Every time I've heard a pundit or a commentator or anyone talk about analytics, because punt is a common sense thing to do. You don't need analytics to decide to punt. Every time I hear analytics being invoked, it's because they decided not to punt. Well, common sense tells you to punt. You don't need the math. It's 4th and 7 from your own 35. It's 13. It's fucking 7 minutes left in the third quarter.
Well, generally speaking,
you don't need math for that. Yeah.
Generally speaking, the rule seems to be if you're at your own 45 and closer, you go for it more than not. So, they lost a lot. New quarterback, Darian Mensah, 34 touchdowns, 6 interceptions last season at Duke. $10 million man. They still have Mark Fletcher in the backfield. But what's better than bringing in Darian Mensah? If you could bring in his number one target, too, which is what Miami did. Cooper Barkate, who, 72 catches. Oh, I'm sorry, that's the wrong person. But Cooper Barkate is in, to pair up with Malachi Toney, who, I have been told may or may not be actually Tyreek Hill in disguise. So
how much Darian had to give him for 10?
I don't know. They brought in.
Malachi's been wearing 10 for a long time. I've seen his highlights. He was wearing 10.
They brought in Cam Vaughn from West Virginia, 15.5 yards per reception. So they're still going to be throwing the ball around the yard. And I think that this team is going to look more like the Cam Ward team than last year's team. Now, Mensah's not the runner that Cam Ward is, but, offense is what I'm talking about.
Yeah, high-powered offense,
getting
the ball downfield. Carson Beck was a glorified game manager, which is fine. Like, as long as you don't turn the ball over, you end up on the Cardinals.
I mean, they got to the title game.
Yeah, so he did his thing. But, I think they're going to be airing it out with Mensah. Second year Malachi Toney,
Yeah, it's happening. So then you got on defense, their secondary was super young last year. You know what they are this year? They're seasoned. But Miami has lost Ruben Bain, Akeem Mesidor, Wesley Bissanti, and Keontae Scott. So there is room for regression, because I don't care what you're recruiting, how talented they are, they're going to need a little while to swing into gear after losing all that. So now you go back to the schedule. We were talking about
you get a couple of layups early.
Yeah, you get a couple of layups until that Clemson game. You know what I mean?
You get the scheme figured out. They probably got some guys in the transfer portal or guys that were just in waiting.
Yep,
they brought in college football. Yeah. College football is like when you can reload a lot quicker when you're at a school that has the pockets that Miami has.
Right. And they went and brought in Damon Wilson from Missouri, who had 9 sacks. They do have their defensive tackles back. They have their lead cornerback, O.J. Frederick. But my question is, how much pressure are they going to be able to generate? Because they're going to have talent. Mario Cristobal is going to recruit the hell out of some players. But you can't lose those guys that they lost and just automatically think you snap a finger and it's right back.
I think you can in Miami.
Maybe.
I think you can in Miami because you have the backdrop of Miami as your recruit. We talk about it with basketball, with the NBA all the time. You have Miami, the city, already as your backdrop to attract people. Then you have Miami and the surrounding areas in the state of Florida as your talent pool, and then you also have, of all the conferences, I think Miami might be furthest ahead than the rest of their conference, no matter the size. I don't think anybody else's conference can say there's one team that's this far ahead of the other 10, 12, or 13 teams, other than maybe Ohio State.
Well, people feel that way about Texas Tech this year, even without Sorsby. Ohio State, a lot of people are still on Indiana. A lot of people are liking Michigan with Kyle Whittingham, but
I'm talking about as far as that gap. I think the Miami gap between Miami being an ACC champ and whoever else you pick that to is probably substantial. So I think they can. And like I said, their schedule kind of lays out to where you got 4 layups before you really have a tough game.
Yeah. The only thing that I'll say, and knock on wood, because I am not hoping, but this is fact, that game, week 3 at Wake Forest, people have been known to get hurt on that shitty field. You know what I mean? Like, you remember the Commanders, FedEx Field, how shitty that field was. Wake Forest is the college version of that.
Yo, MetLife up here in Jersey, that has a ghost in the grass kind of field too.
Yeah, so that's where like things could get problematic. But everything considered equal, I think Miami loses the game to South Bend. I think they go through the ACC undefeated, and I think they get to Charlotte. Who will meet them there? So last year, my ACC title game was Clemson and Louisville. And I'm back on that narcotic, saying I'm picking Louisville. So the thing with Louisville, they are breaking in another quarterback. Last year they went and got Miller Moss, who, for all intents and purposes, was a disappointment. Like he lit them up the year before in the bowl game, 5 or 6 touchdown passes, and then he came into Louisville last year, 16 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. That ain't going to get it done. No. So they went 9-4 last year, 4-4.
Those are high school numbers.
So I don't know if you remember this name, but Louisville has brought in a new quarterback, and he goes by the name of Lincoln Kienholz. He was one of those quarterbacks at Ohio State. He was there with Aaron Nolan, when they had all the recruits, all the quarterbacks, and they didn't know who they were going to play. That was
he out of like South Dakota, something like that, somewhere.
Let's see.
Like South Dakota, Mr. Basketball and Mr. Football or something like that.
He is from South Dakota, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I remember watching like an all-star game. Yeah.
Yeah. So what I would say about that is,
look at me knowing college football. Yeah, gang.
So what I would say is, Jeff Brom is human. Ryan Day is human. Sometimes they make mistakes. I don't think both of them were wrong about a quarterback. You know what I mean? So I like what Louisville's starting with. They get Isaac Brown back, their starting running back, who was hurt a lot of last year. So they get him back, and he could be a Doak Walker candidate. I'm just throwing that out there. They did lose Chris Bell at receiver. They lost Lacey. So that's going to hurt a little bit. But they got LaWayne McCoy from Florida State, who I had big hopes for this year, but he decided to go to Louisville. But then on the other side of the ball, Clev Lubin, 8.5 sacks. Stanquan Clark. Antonio Watts. Louisville's not hurting on defense. You know what I mean? So from there, the only problem is that you got to shore up that offensive line. I think that the schedule would be the only thing in their way. Because as you can see, Mr. Logical, they are opening up with the 2 words that Mr. Logical hates more than anything else in college football. Neutral site. They're playing Ole Miss in Nashville, which might be more of a home field for Louisville, but we'll see.
It's less neutral than other SEC games, but I just figured give the home fans that opportunity to wreck that game. Yeah. I don't know why it has to be on the even playing field. You got enough bowl games at the end of the year for that.
Right. So then you got Villanova, so they get their FCS cream puff. Then Mr. Logical coming into Papa John Stadium is the team that Louisville has never beat. Louisville 0-4 all time against SMU. SMU, came to the ACC 2 years ago, lost both of those games, including a 38-6 game. So keep your eye on that. They get Wake, they get NC State. Then, if you were reading ChopChat.com, you would have saw me say that Louisville Florida State game is the game that's going to define Florida State's season. Now, there's a reason for this. PTSD moment. Back in 2002 on a Thursday night, Florida State went into Louisville, Kentucky in the middle of the rainstorm. Lost the overtime game. I don't like it. Weeknight game at Louisville. Get it out my face. Then they get Syracuse. Fran Brown has to get his team back on track. So far, the SMU game is the only game besides Ole Miss that I'm kind of But the good news is that Ole Miss is in a conference game. So then they get their bye week. Stanford, Then they go to Atlanta. They go to Belichick. That Pitt game gets interesting, and then they close with Kentucky. So I'm looking at Louisville as y'all should go no worse than 9-3.
You think 9-3, but one of the losses is the Ole Miss. So that makes puts them what? How many? You got two. You got 2 conference losses then, right?
Yep. And I think
they're playing 9, so you got them 7-2.
Yeah, I think this year is going to resemble last year as far as is like. So I know the youth overused the hell out of this word, but mid. The ACC is mid. So basically, you're just going to have clumps of mid stuck together.
It's going to be it's going to be 8-1.
Maybe. I mean, but that might be Miami. You know what I mean? So
yeah, that's what I'm saying. So like 8-1, 7-1, or so you said 8-1 and like a bunch of 7-2s and then a couple of 7-1s.
Yeah.
Or not even, but like just
maybe
like clumped in.
Yeah. You know what's funny? We were one of our very first episodes. I was like, yo, this is so weird. I look like Scottie Pippen right now. So like as I was sitting here, like I was just like, I gotta grow some hair. I'm looking too much like James Franklin right now.
Yo, you do look like James Franklin. And you got the maroon jersey on. Wow.
So, I was literally just talking and I was just like, whoa. You know what I mean? But UVA.
Penn State just fired me.
UVA, the Cavs, the Wahoos, coming in off that ACC title loss that we talked about last year. And it's going to get real like crazy because they opened up
Norfolk State.
That is.
Shout out to Mike Vick.
Oh yeah, I forgot all about that.
Yeah, shout out to Mike Vick out there at Norfolk State Spartans. Let's go.
Yeah. So last year, what's funny about this is NC State was the one ACC team that beat Virginia in the regular season. So this game, was originally supposed to be the 2 words that Mr. Logical hates more than anything else in college football.
There's absolutely no reason for a Virginia and North Carolina football team to play on a neutral site.
Well, not just any neutral site. They were going to play in Brazil. But it got rescheduled. Ain't
nobody flying from Charlottesville to Brazil
to watch the Wahoos?
Yeah, come on.
So, all right. So Virginia's schedule, I think, has a couple of landmines here. It looks pretty easy on paper, but then you just got to think about it for a minute. You know what I'm saying? So the game will be in Charlottesville. Their quarterback, I know you remember this name. They brought in Bo Pribula.
He's still out here playing football?
Yeah, they brought him in. And his backup is Eli Holstein. Like, these quarterbacks are just Pitt. Yeah, these kids are just all over the place these days. That was the hardest part about putting this together. Like, somebody stay still.
I am so thankful that I'm a linebacker dad and not a quarterback dad, because these quarterbacks and the way they move, they just run. They run from and into problems simultaneously every year. You want to be a starter. He was a starter somewhere else in Pennsylvania. Now somehow both of y'all end up in Virginia in the same position. Yeah.
So after they get done,
linebackers all day.
After they get done disposing of Michael Vick, it's one of those things, right?
How dare you?
There's another neutral
state. Upstate.
Hey, there's another neutral site for you. Virginia and West Virginia playing in Charlotte.
Another ridiculous.
You know what I'm saying? And this is year 2 of Rich Rod. That's why I got my eye on that game, because I expect West Virginia to be a little bit better. Don't sleep on Delaware. Could you get caught looking ahead to your trip to Tallahassee? Because, as a Florida State fan, I got Virginia on my mind. So, you know what I'm saying? So, like, don't sleep on Delaware.
Lovers.
Then you got Syracuse, SMU, Duke, at Wake, host Cal, UNC, and the big one with Va Tech. So, Virginia, I think their range is anywhere from 7-5 to 10-2. I think they fit somewhere in that realm. Now they got the new quarterback. The reason that I like them so much, Mr. Logical, is because their offensive line has a combined 164 starts. So when you're breaking in a new quarterback, you might want to be able to protect them. And granted, he can run. They brought in some running backs, so I'm loving this. Middlebrooks is going to probably be the star by the end of the season, but he might not start the season as the starter. It might be Peyton Lewis from out of Tennessee. All right. So they got 30 transfers coming in this year. Out of those 30 transfers, 14 of them are seniors. So you're getting more experience to the point where, they're a top 15 average age team in college football this year. So this is the problem. Bo Pribula played well at Missouri last year, but as we remember, he didn't finish the season. So he's experienced, but when he's
been on a lot of campuses, but he's never been the man,
right?
And that's gonna show through when it gets rocky. It's gonna show why the other guy deserves a shot.
Yeah, hopefully in Tallahassee. Hopefully in Tallahassee.
No, I'm talking about his backup. Like his backup being
Holstein.
Again, being the guy who's taking some reps, Division I guy, big arm, big quarterbacks. Was like, if you've never been the man, like Bo hasn't really been the man, I think it's gonna show in some of these tough losses. Like the neutral site game against West Virginia, that's a tough game. The crowd won't be. I don't think the crowd will be in your favor. Granted, Charlotte, North Carolina and Charlottesville are closer than West Virginia is. I think West Virginia's football fan base might be a little bit more rabid. Might want to actually make that drive down to Charlotte, so that'd be tough. Or if it's not even a big crowd at all, and it's no energy from the crowd, I think that's a tough matchup. And then, like you said, it's another guy that's been a starter in college football. Who's gonna get some looks. So yeah, it's a tough life when you're a quarterback.
Yeah, so then they got Cam Robinson back on defense. He's gonna miss the first couple of games from an injury from last season. But last season he had a block punt, he had a pick six, he had a fumble recovery. So when he does get to the field, he's the kind of guy that teams have to know where he is on every play. They brought in Brandon Hillman to replace Devin Neal. The news about that safety is that the last 2 years, the person that has played that position that he's replacing has led the team in tackles. So no pressure. Donovan Platt, starting corner. He was supposed to be CB1 last year, but he got hurt before the season. So to some degree, you're getting another advantage because this is a guy that was going to start anyway the year before, so you're still in good hands. Where they're going to be in trouble, I think, is losing Trell Harris, the big receiver, because they're going to have to revamp their receiver room. And with the type of quarterback that Bo Pribula is, that might take a minute.
Target.
Yeah, that might take a minute.
He's down there somewhere, kind of a target. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm giving NC State the win in week 1. I'm gonna give them that. So I got UVA starting out 0-1. I think they get through, and I'm just gonna pick Florida State to beat them. I think they lose to SMU. So
that's 4-3.
Yeah. So then I think they're good, and then you got the toss up with Virginia Tech at the end of the season. So so that's why I said anywhere from, because there could be another game in there somewhere. But I'm going to just say, for the time being, I'll give UVA 8-4. Then you got Va-Tech. Let's talk about Va-Tech, right? James Franklin, he's in there. He got Ethan Grunkemeyer from Penn State with him. Luke Reynolds come in with him. This is crazy, Mr. Logical.
Yeah.
When do you think the last time Virginia Tech won the ACC was?
Tyrod Taylor didn't. No. Hold on. Marcus Vick didn't.
Nope, they lost to Florida State. 4 lost Florida, or I think that was 5
The
lost.
4, yeah, it's 5 lost. 4,
Yeah.
4. They ended up with 5 losses because they lost because I had a Florida State fan as a coworker who kept trying to tell me they were a better team. I'm like, okay. Tyrod Taylor, I don't think he won it. It has to be somewhere 2011-12 range.
2010. And the last time they made the ACC title game was 2016. But where Virginia Tech has a plus here, they have 2 very big pluses. You know, they're one of the top teams in the nation in returning production. Obviously, or 3, because they got James Franklin on the sidelines now. You know what I mean? And then they kept Brent Pry, who was their head coach, as the defensive coordinator. He was James Franklin's defensive coordinator at Penn State before he took the Virginia Tech job. So you got continuity galore. You know what I mean? Now,
or do you have a conflict waiting to brew?
I don't think so. I don't think so.
It's like living in the basement with your ex-wife and her new husband.
Oh, Jesus.
It's all good. It's all good for a while.
But so, Kamari Copeland on the defensive line, I like a lot. You know, Virginia Tech always keeps a good secondary. So they start off with VMI, Old Dominion, Maryland, BC. I'm looking at 4-0. And then you get that Friday night game against Pitt. The good news is it's at home. Now, the part about that is that James Franklin and your least favorite college football coach, Pat Narduzzi, they got beef. And then, of course, you know, there's the whole Penn State Pitt thing. So, you know, there might be some extra. If it was in Pitt, I'm sure it would be all kinds of tension and just going nuts. But it's at Blacksburg, you know, which ain't no better. It ain't no better for Pitt. Then you get Cal, so that could be a loss on the road going out to the West Coast. Get Georgia Tech at home. Go to Clemson, so that's going to be tough. You know, get SMU after the bye week. Stanford. At Miami before you close with Virginia. So that's a rough close. You know, Virginia or Clemson, bye week, weekday game at SMU. You get Stanford in the middle. Then you get Miami and UVA back-to-back. That's a rough close to the season. So I'm giving Virginia Tech. Go ahead.
I'm a little bit more optimistic.
Okay. Say more.
I like the 4-0 start.
Okay.
And
it could be 5. Sure. It could be 5 with that home game.
And we got Narduzzi in Blacksburg. I like that. I'm still not a big fan of Cal. I don't really think they put that much. I don't think they put that much out on the field that can really scare you. I know.
You just hating on Ron Rivera, ain't you?
Listen, I mean, it's just not a thing that really happens. Guys changing leagues, and it's not like Ron Rivera is like ultra dynamic head coach.
Well, at least he's the GM and not the head coach this time.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So it's like it's not as if he's like this great football mind. I'm pretty sure he knows more about football than I do, but I don't think he has enough to turn the academic football team at Cal into like a juggernaut. So I think Virginia Tech looks. I think 6-0 going to that Georgia Tech game is not crazy. Miami is probably a tough game. SMU, I think their quarterback's ability to be a playmaker, that could be tough.
Mm-hmm.
But 9-3, and then we'll see how the tiebreakers and everything shake out in conference.
That's what I had them at. I had them at 9-3.
Yeah. So especially with Franklin being a Big Ten coach, I know we knocked him, but like he got fired because he couldn't beat Michigan and Ohio State, who's been a college football juggernaut since Theodore Roosevelt was president. So it's like, I get it. You couldn't beat this ultra dominant team that's been dominant for well over 100 years. So I think he comes in, and then Virginia Tech, the way they play football, I think they've always like fed their football program. I think they've always had an identity. You just need an offensive spark. When they've had the dynamic quarterbacks, Virginia Tech has been one of the best teams over the last 25 years.
Well, I think it's a perfect match to start out because, James Franklin, as you said, he really only loses to top 10 teams. Like, obviously, UCLA and Northwestern got him last year, but that was just an anomaly.
Yeah, they were 1 foot out of the door.
But at this point, Virginia Tech fans, they fear Old Dominion. They fear James Madison. James Franklin will beat them. So,
Yeah.
So for right now, get your supremacy of Virginia back and let those recruiting classes start to fill in. And, I think Virginia Tech in the next, say, 3 to 5 years is going to be back in conversations that they've been excluded from.
2 years.
2 years. Okay.
2 years.
SMU. They did beat Miami last year. We talked about it. They do go to Florida State on Labor Day. We talked about it. And it gets interesting, because SMU is the second place in odds, for the ACC title this year.
Correct.
And I don't know how I feel about SMU. Like, they lost a lot, especially on the offensive side of the ball. Now, the same SMU team that beat Miami lost to Wake, and they lost to Ron Rivera, that Mr. Logical, said is like, that guy ain't shit. But they did that. SMU has won 31 games over the last 3 years. Since they joined the ACC, the only team that has won more games is Miami. Linebacker is going to be the strength of their defense. How about this? Let's sidebar for a quick second. Kevin Jennings getting a building named after him. That's going to be the new wave to keep your players when you can't pay them. So I know SMU could pay them, but they didn't need to do all that. But he's starting over, like I said, as far as the offensive talent around him with another Florida State receiver. Kendrick Raphael.
Strong name.
33 carries, 111 yards. That was last year at Cal against SMU. So, so they know him very well.
That's a lot of touches. That's a lot of touches.
It is. Jarvis Lee, transfer coming in from USF. He's an underrated name that I don't think people say a lot because he went to USF. So now that he's going to be on these ACC TVs, you might hear his name a little bit more. Jimmy Wyrick from the Alamo, said, let's go 2-1-0. UTSA is coming into SMU. So SMU has talent. It's just going to be about meshing it together. And how long does that take? That's going to be the question. So looking at the schedule, right? They open up Labor Day night. Florida State, who gets the game the week before against New Mexico State to kind of warm up, test some things out. So if this was just a 1-for-1, Florida State didn't have a game, I might feel a little different about it. But I'm going to give Florida State a little grace, and I'm going to pick Florida State to win that game. Then SMU plays future Mountain West Conference member UC Davis. They're Mountain West and everything else. Sounds like they're going to be joining in football once they get their money up. Yeah. Then they go to Louisville. Like I said, they haven't lost to Louisville yet, but first time for everything. So I can see SMU starting out 1-2. Then they get Missouri State, win. BC win. Bye week.
Win.
And there's some tricky games. Virginia, Cal, at Syracuse, because I think Syracuse is going to be a little bit better than people think. I'll get into that later. Va-Tech on a weeknight, but it's at home. Wake, go to Notre Dame, and then they close out on the road at Palo Alto. So just looking at this, I can see best case scenario 11-1. Because Florida State, that's just me wishing upon a star. You know what I mean? Yeah. They should win that game. You know what I mean? I'm saying they won't, but they should. Louisville, you got to beat them. Louisville hasn't beat SMU until they beat SMU. So I got to factor that into the decision. That Virginia-Cal back-to-back is a little interesting, but they're both at home. You know what I mean? So theoretically, you should win those. So at South Bend is going to be tough.
I hate the fact that a Virginia team and a California team are going to play conference games against a team in Texas and their Atlantic Coast Conference. I'm going to harp on that forever.
That's why I told you, all Coast Conference, baby.
The Notre Dame thing might be tough. 11-1, that might be a stretch. If you are feeling the Florida State, as much as you are, I just find it hard to believe that any team in this conference is gonna escape. I think Miami's your only one-loss team. I think everybody else is at 3.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to land on. I was going to land on 9-3. I think best case scenario 9-3. 11-1. I think worst case scenario is 7-5. But
yeah, I think every other ceiling. I think Miami ceiling is obviously undefeated. Their floor is 11-1. And I think your other contenders, I'm going to throw Virginia Tech in there as a contender because I think college football coach, quarterback, change of scenery with a good culture, I think that can get you through the early stages. I think the training camp, I think the first few games, especially if they go 3, 4, 5-0, like a team like Virginia Tech with a rich history. It's not like national history. They don't have like a history like Alabama or LSU or Michigan or anything like that. But they like this, like I said, last 25, 30 years, they have been one of the premier, upper echelon programs. So I think a resurgence with new faces, same kind of tenacity. I think they can get, your early 4 or 5 wins in a row. But 9-3 is probably the best that you're probably going to get out of them just because it's new. I think a lot of teams in the conference fall into that space where it's like Clemson, they probably have high expectations. I don't know if you go in there next.
We are.
But because like I feel like Dabo didn't really adapt to his recruiting style. I think he kind of the way he recruits and the way he feels about recruiting is probably more in line with guys like Nick Saban and for NCAA basketball, Jay Wright. These coaches have said, I'm done. I'm not dealing with all of this stuff. He's staying here in college football and not dealing with this stuff is going to put him in a position where he's going to be at a talent deficit in certain points of some of these tough games that
so the good news
always
is
seems to get.
So the good news is last year Clemson only took 3 players in the transfer portal. This year they bumped up to 16. Even though when he was at the ACC Media Day yesterday, they talked to him about the portal, and he was talking about how he's going to stick with the quarterbacks that they've been developing. He doesn't need a shiny new toy, which goes back to what you were just saying. So with that being said, they went 7-6 last year, and there was some legit talk going on. Is he going to be back this year? Just the way that he handled it. It wasn't the fact that he was losing, because a guy like that's won national titles, major university relevant, you don't just toss to the side. But it was the way he was so defiant and openly expressing that he didn't want to deal with the transfer portal.
He's openly expressing that he's a relic and he's not going to adapt. If you don't want to embrace analytics, I understand that, because you can put a tangible product on the field without analytics. Not backfilling your talent pool when you, as a team, you're a 5-star, 4-star recruiting machine at Clemson. But if you get too many of them, they're not going to stay. So if you're losing 2 to 4 in different position groups, you have to embrace the avenue that got them out of town to get guys back in town. And like personally, like I said, I'm a father of a high school senior linebacker. I want spots for high school players on these teams. But as of right now, it's not happening that often. You're losing out on these spots. So for him to just be oblivious to like the obvious, like, yo, you're a top tier national championship caliber Division I team. You have to go get these players from other schools. You know, New Mexico State doesn't need to get a bunch of transfers, but like Clemson, you need to go ahead and operate like you are in a different stratosphere of college football. You cannot, you can't fight that off.
So my biggest question is, because of course we're changing quarterbacks now. You know, Cade Klubnik is in the NFL, and now they're going to Chris Verzina. You know, he started against SMU last year, threw for 300 yards, 317 yards, 3 touchdowns. But my question is, Garrett Riley was the offensive coordinator. And I was wondering because, to me, I thought Dabo was hindering Garrett Riley. Like, a lot of people thought that Garrett Riley was doing a bad job. I thought that Dabo was kind of not letting
the rain.
Like it was like, no, we're just going to do this. We're going to do that. So now Garrett Riley's out. You know, and now we got Chad Morris as the offensive coordinator at Clemson. So we'll see how that changes, if it looks any different, if their offense produces a little bit more. Last year, they were also playing a wide receiver at running back, you know, on purpose, you know. So, like, he was pretty good. He got drafted by the Ravens. But still, that goes back to the transfer portal point. Clemson also lost Avion Terrell, you know, AJ's brother, you know, TJ Parker, Peter Woods, and a couple of more players off of that defense. But they do still have Bryant Wesco Jr. and TJ Moore, who might be the best wide receiver duo in the ACC south of, you know, outside of Miami. So they got things going for them. They got Tom Allen's the defensive coordinator. The schedule is kind of funny, though, because they open at the other Death Valley, Lane Kiffin style. So Lane Kiffin's first game is against Clemson, so that'll be a coaching matchup for those of you that still think that Lane Kiffin isn't necessarily a good coach. Let's see him up against Dabo and let the chips fall where they may. Then they get Georgia Southern, they get Belichick, they go out to Cal on a weeknight. Then they get Miami. So I don't know how I feel about that. Like, could Cal be the trap game? Because I think they're going to get up for North Carolina, because I think Belichick will get up for Dabo. At least the score might not look like it, but I think they'll come out and, you know, have energy.
They got to be at least, with no Notre Dame on the schedule, they got to come out of that 4-1. And I don't know if you beat LSU in Death Valley opening your season.
I don't think you do.
But if you don't, you gotta beat Miami, because I don't think you definitely can't slip up to Cal. Like you said, that's a trap game.
On a weeknight, West Coast.
3-2, and you can run the tape. Now you got South Carolina at the end of the year. Yeah, I'm big on Virginia Tech. You're probably higher on Florida State than you're letting on. I think you want a few wins to happen, and then you'll start wearing your headdress and stuff on the show. I think you start ramping it up.
We'll talk about Florida State next. The bye week, then they get Charleston Southern, you know, Vatech, you know, and it's at home. Then they go to Tally. You know what I mean? Then you get your whole Syracuse, Georgia Tech, Duke. They lost to Georgia Tech last year, and Duke last year as well, but Darian Mensah's gone.
They have to have at least 4 wins going into that Virginia Tech game. I don't know how you get them. You got to have at least 4 wins, because if you're 3-3 there, if you're 3-3 after those 6 games, you can't risk 7th game being under 500.
I think Clemson's either going to be 10-2 or they're going to be 6-6. Like no in between, one or the other. Like because
you think they're gonna put it all together, or it's all gonna fall apart?
Yeah, because like I said, because Dabo, like I just don't like the taste. You know what I mean? After what happened last year, like it's like
you can't be rigid. Like I'm stubborn when it comes to analytics, but you can't be rigid the way he is. Yeah,
right. So the LSU game goes without saying, and I'm sure that's going to be a night game, the night ABC game that week. You know what I mean? So you're going into Death Valley at night, the real Death Valley. You know what I mean? Belichick, like I said, he's going to have that. I think Carolina will be better. I'm not saying that they're a contender in the ACC, but, that's still Bill Belichick scheming against your new quarterback. I don't think he's going to play much against Georgia Southern because they'll probably wipe Georgia Southern out. So, that's going to be a tough ask. It's at home, though, so I say Clemson wins. Going out to the West Coast weeknight, interesting. You know what I mean? Like just the travel, going all the way over there and then having to come back. And I know you get to adjust for a week or so, but then to play Miami off of that is tough. You get your bye week, you get your cupcake, you get James Franklin, granted, at home. So I'm okay with giving you that game. But I think James Franklin might be, I think Dabo is more of a motivational rah-rah coach. You know what I'm saying? I think James Franklin is a coach. Yeah. So, so that's tough. Go to Tallahassee, go to Syracuse. Lost to Syracuse last year. And that was with Klubnik. You know what I mean? And then, you lost to Georgia Tech. I'm just saying, by the time you get to South Carolina, Shane Beamer might be coaching for his job.
This could be a 5-7 year for Clemson.
I won't go that far.
Why not?
If the quarterback gets hurt, sure, but like not off top. I don't know. I think they still got talent. So like I said, they got the best wide receiver duo in the ACC. Their defense, they have one of the top, I'll say, 6 or 7 defensive coordinators in college football. Like, I don't think it's just going to be a losing season. I just think that it might be one of those things where they start to tune Dabo out.
When it rains and pours and that, like, we've seen it before. Like, we already know he's 1 foot out of the door because he doesn't like he's not showing the adaptability that you need as a coach. So you can already, if I'm an AD or if I'm any kind of executive or whatever titles they've kind of levied upon the people in charge of running a college football program, I'm going into the season knowing that his archaic way of thinking isn't going to get us to 10 or 11 wins. Yeah. I already know that. But can his, like you said, his motivation, his ability to recruit talent and get talent to play well, can we look valuable? Can we look like a viable winning team? Can we look like a team that has it together that's just missing a couple of pieces? Because if he doesn't embrace these 16 transfer players that came in, they're all going to leave on top of the other guys that came. So if like you get a bunch of guys that transfer into Clemson and he doesn't want to play them because he, sticking to his guns with it, he deems his loyalty. Like, I recruited this guy to high school. I want to give him a shot. And these guys are like, I transfer here and you're not letting me get my shot. I'm out.
Yeah. So it's, Tallahassee, what came first, the chicken or the egg? So you got Mike Norvell. You don't want to give up NIL money to get transfers in there. You know what I mean? But you're going to fire him and then bring a new coach and give him NIL money. So it's kind of one of those things.
Paying Norvell his money.
Right. So it's one of those things, right? And when I look at this Florida State team, I can't help but look at that schedule. I just can't help but look at it. You know what I mean? SMU, like, coming in at Bama after the bye week after that. You get UVA and at Louisville back-to-back, and you thought that was tough. You go road game Louisville and Miami back-to-back. You know what I mean? With that Louisville game being on the road, like I talked about. Then, you get another bye week before Clemson, BC at Pitt, and look at that date. That's November, so it's gonna be a little chilly up there. You know, say this ain't gonna be down here in Florida. Then you got NC State, and then you close with the Gators. So right off top, I got them beating New Mexico State. I got them beating Central Arkansas. I'll call SMU a toss-up. Lost to Bama. I think they clip UVA. They lose to Louisville and Miami. Beat Clemson. Beat BC. Lose to Pitt. NC State's another one of my PTSD teams. Beat Florida. So I'm looking at 6-6 or 7-5. Best case scenario, 8-4. But to get to 8-4, you have to beat SMU.
So your first 6 weeks, you got 5 games. What's the record there? You got it at?
I got it at 3-2.
3-2. So you got the UVA win.
Yeah, UVA at SMU, and I'm sorry.
New Mexico State.
Hold on, New Mexico State, Central Arkansas,
and UVA wins.
Yeah. So those are the 3. Yeah.
All right. So I don't think anyone's getting fired at 3-2, especially when you play Bama and SMU.
Hey, but
and you're on a 2-game win streak.
You might get fired if you lose both of those games. And depending on how you lose, right? Because
you think at 1-2 and you lose and you score,
I think it depends how it looks.
You score 24 points and you score 20 points total in 2 weeks.
I truly think that they
35-10, you out there.
I truly think you probably still wouldn't fire him just because of the money situation, but once you get to Louisville and Miami, if you lose both of those games by, say, 17 or more.
And that puts you at 3-4.
Then, yeah, I think you're out of there. Because I want to fire you before you play BC. You know what I'm saying? Because you're going to beat BC. You know what I'm saying? So I don't necessarily want to fire you after a win.
So you want to fire them you want to fire them after the Miami loss. Potentially. Yeah. That puts them at 3-4. Then you got Clemson. So you want to go in with a fresh coaching staff after the bye week against Clemson. In theory.
I would say yes, but now that I look at it, I would probably rather
just play the season out.
If you lose to Clemson, fire you before BC. And then that way the interim can take over with a winnable game. Tom Herman more than likely. So
that puts you at 3-5.
Yeah.
With a couple of layup wins and 5 bad losses. Yeah. That can be hard.
So Mike Norvell's taking over play calling this year because Gus Malzahn abruptly retired at the end of the year. And of course, anybody that's watched Sports Reports as Ordered knows 30 for 30 from ESPN, and I call him 20 for 20 because his offense is the greatest in between the 20s and they can't finish. You know what I mean? With Norvell calling plays, they do still have Tim Harris, who came to Florida State with Malzahn from UCF. So I want to see how many concepts they keep and how much of it is actually going to reflect Norvell. Ashton
I don't
Daniels.
like what head coach call plays.
I don't either. Ashton Daniels, the new quarterback from Auburn, and previously at Stanford. Turnover machine. And the thing is that you don't have to be a Heisman candidate. You don't have to be Jordan Travis. You just have to be a little bit better than Tommy Castellanos, because last year Florida State went 5-7, turned down a bowl game that they got offered, as they should have, but they lost 2 receivers. They got the legacy receiver coming in, Devin Carter. I'm excited to see him. Makai Danzy is still there, the track star. So weapons, bring in Wisner from Texas, trade Wisner from Texas to help out Usman Chroma. Your running game looks great. On the defensive side of the ball, you bring in all Sun Belt linebacker Chris Jones from Southern Miss. You bring in Makai Bayer from Nebraska, who played under Tony White. He knows the system because Tony White was the defensive coordinator at Nebraska. Earl Little is going to be the loss that hurts. You know, he went to Ohio State. You brought in Ryland Kennedy from Texas A&M. You brought the Desir twins back. You know, Nehemiah Chandler out of South Alabama, I think, is going to be good. You were able to keep Jabril Brawls. So this team, for lack of better words, in my mind, is loaded. It's just, what's the mentality of the team? That's going to be the problem.
So if you think they're loaded, but you still think the coach has the possibility of getting fired, like where's the disconnect? Like where would you, if you could replace,
and they might have the best receiver in college football, or at least second or third best.
Where would you replace? So if you feel like Florida State is loaded, but you still also feel like they're a 6-6 team, what group would you take out? Would you swap out the coaching staff, the offensive line?
It's the offensive line. It's the offensive line. They're replacing basically 4 out of 5 starters. And with a new quarterback, granted, he's a running quarterback, so that could help some. You know, you got the receivers, but are you going to be able to have time to take advantage of Deuce being 6'6"? Then, you know, on the defensive side of the ball, you should have a pass rush because Florida State sucked in the red zone. They sucked in forcing turnovers, and they sucked in pass rush last year. So I think the pass rush should be fixed. Theoretically speaking, if you got a pass rush, you could probably force more turnovers. You know, so, like, I think there's a lot to be excited about, but I also believe that you have to have culture and you have to know how to win. So that's where I'm looking at Norvell from the standpoint of, because there were times last year where it looked like the players were just laughing at him. Like, you know what I mean? Like, he's trying to rile them up, and they're just, like, walking off like, this dude. And you know what I mean? So it's just one of those things, you know. But we're going to keep this train going. Mr. Logical signing out.
Got to sign out.
Yeah, he'll be back on Tuesday. We'll be talking about the Big Ten on Tuesday. So, you know what I'm saying? But we're going to finish off this preview. Be good. You know what I'm saying? Take it easy. All right. So,
happy anniversary, Faye.
Yeah. We appreciate you. So Florida State, you know, there's a lot going on. It's the schedule more than anything else, you know, is going to be the issue, because I don't know who they pissed off. They got the 8 ACC games, so then you got the game at Bama because of the matchup last year, home and home. So that's just a lot to ask for. But NC State, you know, one of those teams that has Florida State number, right? They get the Virginia schedule this year. You know, the Virginia schedule, meaning the easy ACC schedule and of course, I know you're going to make jokes out there and say the ACC is just easy in general, but look at this here. You know, they get the game to start the season with Virginia. They get Richmond. They get Vandy early. I'd rather play them early than late. They play Appalachian State before Louisville. So Louisville, I think, it becomes the first loss of the season. You get Wake Forest. You get Stanford. Both of those are wins, I believe. Cal, tricky. Duke win. Syracuse win. And then your 2 with Florida State and North Carolina. So NC State has a real viable chance for 10-2. You know, Dave Doran in year 14, you know, got to do something. They finished the season 4-1 last year. We saw the crazy game against Florida State. They lost defensive coordinator Tony Gibson. He's the head coach at Marshall now. DJ Elliott is in. He was in-house, so he's taken over. CJ Bailey is either a top 4 to top 6 quarterback in the ACC, I think, this year. So I expect a lot of high-tempo offense. I expect a lot of aggressive defense, like swarming I'm talking about. Tyreek Hopper, wide receiver. He's a freshman. He's coming in, was not recruited. Remember Steph Curry? You know, he's right there for Virginia Tech. Nope, you end up at Davidson. Well, Tyreek Hopper broke the wide receiver yards and touchdown record in North Carolina this year. Grew up in Greenville. He didn't even get offered by ECU. So you talk about chip on your shoulder? Yes, sir. So, you know, I think he's going to show out. Hollywood Smothers is gone. So they brought in JoJo Trader from Miami, who, if you remember, going into last season, there was a lot of hope for JoJo Trader to show out. So talent. The schedule is front-loaded, like I said. Gets good in the middle, toughens up at the very end. So I'm going to just go ahead and call NC State 9-3. How about that? Cal, experienced team, non-experienced coaches. Tasha Lapoy taking over. He's a former linebacker for Cal. He was the defensive coordinator at Oregon. JKS, the real deal, quarterback at Cal. He's got some good receivers with him. They brought in Chase Hendricks, who was all MAC at Ohio. Ian Strong is in from Rutgers. On defense, they did lose Luke Farrelly, who was the defensive freshman of the year and defensive player of the year. And they lost all ACC linebacker. So I think it's going to be the trenches that keeps Cal from being what they could be. But let's look at their schedule here for a quick second. And I'm interested in right off top, UCLA, Bob Chesney. It's at home. So you got to like Cal there. That Syracuse game gets tricky. Wagner, Clemson, UNLV. I'm taking UNLV to beat Cal. That's one of my early season upsets. Virginia Tech, tough game, but it's at home, so we'll see. At SMU and NC State, back-to-back is tough. That's tough, especially when you factor in the travel. Get your bye week. Virginia, you lost to Stanford last year, and you close with Pitt. So I'm looking at Cal at about 6-6. They make a bowl game, but barely, and I think next year they come in better as long as they don't lose too much. Georgia Tech. I've always said that if I wasn't a Florida State fan and I was a fan of another ACC team, it would be Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech, right off top, they get Colorado coming in, the return match. They get Tennessee. So they're either going to be 2-0 or 0-2 because I don't have a lot of faith in Tennessee this year, and jury's still out on Colorado. So Georgia Tech could be 4-0 headed into their bye week if all things go well. Maybe they go 5-0 with a win over Duke, but then they get Virginia Tech. Then after that, it's just all over with. They beat BC. I think they lose at Pitt. They lose to Louisville, lose to Clemson, beat Wake, and then they beat Georgia. Oh, I'm sorry, they lose to Georgia. I'm sorry. I did not say what y'all think. But they lost Buster Faulkner, the offensive coordinator. He's at Florida now. Took Aaron Philo with him, who was supposed to be the starting quarterback this year because Haynes King is gone. So what does that leave you? That leaves you Alberto Mendoza. And yes, he is the brother of Fernando, coming in from Indiana. And I know a lot of people out there are saying Cignetti got rid of him. No, I think Cignetti just wanted experience. So it had nothing to do with, I think you're a bum. I think that you can't get the job done. It's just there's a veteran quarterback out here, and I'm ready to win titles. So Alberto Mendoza at Georgia Tech. Eric Rivers is gone, 14.3 yards per game, one of the best receivers in college football, from a year ago. They brought in Justice Haynes from Michigan, tough runner, So I think that Georgia Tech is going to be ground and pound. Brent Key, offensive lineman, when he was in college, the head coach, he reminds me a lot of Dan Campbell from that standpoint of just keeping it real, keeping it raw, and motivating his team. You're not going to play Georgia Tech and not know that you played Georgia Tech. They're going to get in you. They were 12th in takeaways last year. We'll see. 122nd in takeaways last year. So they had issues forcing turnovers, but I think their new defensive coordinator will take care of that. But I think Georgia Tech is probably looking at a 7-5 year. Syracuse, a team that is an odd team when you really think about it because Fran Brown is back for year 3. They went 10-3 year 1. Last year, they won at Clemson for the first time ever. Then Steve Angeli got hurt. You looked up Ricky Collins, quarterback. Nope, Ricky Collins got hurt. They didn't win another game, didn't score more than 18 points in any of those games. They bring in Malachi Nelson. This could have been a reality show. Syracuse, the last 2 years, has led the nation in passing up until a point. So 2024, Kyle McCord at quarterback led the nation in passing. Last year before Angeli got hurt, led the nation in passing. So I'm not saying this is Texas Tech air raid, but they know how to toss the rock. So we'll see if Angeli can start the season coming off that injury. The running game is going to have to be key for Syracuse. They lost Jonte Cook, Calvin Russell, who was supposed to stand out this year, towards Achilles in spring camp. So Cole Weaver out of Miami of Ohio, he might be the best receiver they have, even if the numbers don't show it. Syracuse, Jawan Johnson, I got my eye on him as a sleeper good player. He's a running back that played quarterback in high school. So there you go. He went to LSU, toss sweeps into passes, halfback pass. We haven't seen a lot of those. So where my question is if Syracuse has a rough go of it early, how does Fran Brown react to that? Because if you remember last season, they beat UConn. It was an overtime game. Fran Brown was so disgusted that they went to overtime with UConn that he made them do sprints on the field after overtime. On defense, Demetrius Samuel, Chris Peel. They have solid linebackers, Gary Bryant III, Antoine. I'm not even going to attempt that last name, but he's a good player. So they have dynamic athletes. Fran Brown, was a secondary coach at Georgia. So I trust that they'll get back on track from that standpoint. But looking at the schedule, they get the easy one with New Hampshire to start out. They get Cal at home. I think that's a win. Syracuse has not won at Pitt since 2001, and they got to go there on a weeknight. They get the bye week, beat UConn. They lose to Virginia and Louisville. I think they beat North Carolina, lose to SMU, lose to Clemson and NC State, lose to BC, beat Notre Dame. So I got Syracuse at 5-7, but it's going to be a tough 5-7 as far as they're going to give some teams some scares that they have no business scaring. Duke, Manny Diaz, what do? You lose your quarterback at the end of the year. You're coming off of a 5-loss season. You win the ACC. You were known for your defense. He's been a defensive coordinator, defensive head coach at Miami, defensive coordinator at Penn State. And then you turn around and lead the ACC in offense last year. Duke did 34.6 points per game. But they opened with Tulane, who they lost to last year. They go to Champaign. But I think they could start 2-0 here. Now, Illinois is going to be the toss-up, but I think they beat Tulane. They're going to play Stafford and William and Mary. So if you could get to 3-1 out of your first 4 games, because I think for this year for Duke, the object is make a bowl game. Then you get Georgia Tech and North Carolina, both still toss-ups, but I think you split there. You beat North Carolina, lose to Georgia Tech. So you're sitting at 4-2 after 6 games. You lose to Virginia, play BC, win that, because I don't know who BC is going to beat this year, but we'll get to that later. NC State, Miami, Clemson, that back-to-back with 2 on the road, nuts. And then you close with Wake Forest. So I think best-case scenario for Duke, and that's with them beating Georgia Tech, that's with them beating either NC State or Virginia. I think you can make an argument for them to get to 8-4. Otherwise, you're looking at 6-6 and possibly 5-7. So they got Nate Shepard back at running back. They brought in Walter Eggett from San Jose State, who threw for 3,000 yards. So, so they're still going to be relying on that offense a little more than Manny Diaz probably wants to. So I just can't get there with Duke this year. UNC, Bill Belichick, year 2. What's different? So last year, it was like a reality show. We heard about Jordan Hudson and what she was doing, what she was wearing every week. Her being down on the field during practice, annoying people, annoying fans from afar that were watching this. There was talks during the middle of the season of Belichick possibly not even coming back this year. Gio Lopez, their starting quarterback who came from the transfer portal last year, is at Wake Forest now. So North Carolina might have a rough start to the season. They're already playing TCU to start the year in Ireland. So I know Sonny Dykes is licking his chops waiting to tear that new secondary apart. On offense, though, they do have a couple of guys that I really like. Jordan Shipp, all ACC potential. Jackson Warren, he's a 6'8" tight end who played quarterback in high school, wide receiver in JUCO, and he transferred in from Colorado State. That game against TCU is going to be tough. And we're going to find out about North Carolina early because, as you can see here, week 4, they get Clemson on the road. They get a bye week. They get Notre Dame. Then they go to Pitt. So right there, North Carolina could easily be looking at, say, 1-4, 2-3. But the good news is that it's year 2 of Bill Belichick. So it's from a continuity standpoint with his son Steven there, the defense should be well rounded out. So from that standpoint, they should stay in games. But you thought that last year too, right? Because they lost 8 games last year by an average of 15.8. 4 of those losses by 23 points. Now, the good news, Bobby Petrino is in as offensive coordinator. And he's had a hell of a road, right? 2013 head coach at Western Kentucky, 2014 at Louisville, 2020 Missouri State, 2023 he was Jimbo's offensive coordinator. Jimbo gets fired. He goes to Arkansas. Sam Pittman gets fired. And here he is in Chapel Hill now. So what does that mean for Bill Belichick going forward? They brought in a Patriot League wide receiver from Lehigh, Mason Humphrey. That just sounds so Belichick, doesn't it? That just sounds like Chris Hogan or something. Billy Edwards is going to be under center this year. He started out at Maryland, went to Wisconsin, injured last year. I don't see it. I'm not a Billy Edwards guy as a Marylander. Last year, they missed a lot of tackles, lots of assignments blown. So I have to think that that's going to get better in year 2. I have to. So, but I'm looking at this, and I see a 1-4 start. And it might just hit the ground from there, or roll downhill. So, I mean, at best, looking at the schedule, I'm saying North Carolina will win 4 games again. Maybe they get 5 just off of Belichick. But we're going to find out early because that TCU game, they get Clemson. And, if nothing else, like I said earlier, Belichick's going to have them ready to play Clemson, at least scheme-wise. Now, whether the talent can pull it off, whole other story. Wake Forest, Jake Dickert, in from Washington State last year. 9 wins, which was more than they had won combined the previous 2 years. They had only won 8 games those previous 2 years. Wake Forest is always an interesting team because they take licks for a couple of years, and then they come back with old dudes. Said, hey, what's going on? Let's see. Disappointing. Let's see what we got here. Yeah, Miami has to win the ACC this year. You're absolutely right. If they don't, something is wrong. And it's probably Mario Cristobal and his decision-making. Hopefully it's not injury because I brought it up earlier. They got to go to Wake Forest. And though they should win that game, that field has been known. As a Florida State fan, trust me, that field has been known to take out people. So everything is on board. Like the only game that Miami fans should really, I guess, feel concerned about is that Notre Dame game at South Bend. Revenge game. When in the year it is because it's going to be a little chillier. Let's look at that schedule again. Maybe James Franklin, but hey, Miami will be a top 10 team, top 5 team. You ain't got to worry about James Franklin, right? So the only other trap really is that game at Clemson, and that's only based off of reputation, who Clemson is, who Dabo Swinney is, and what Clemson has done over the years. But wait. They lost Damon Claiborne. I just mentioned they just brought in Gio Lopez as their quarterback. So their schedule sets up kind of nicely for them, but they have to win the games that they need to win. So the question is are they going to be able to throw the deep ball? Are they going to try to throw the deep ball? I think Wake's defense is going to be legit. They're bringing back Langston Hardy and Gabe Kershke. They combined for 23 tackles for losses and 12 sacks. I think that their schedule, like I mentioned, they open with Akron, they open at Purdue. So, or I'm sorry, they go to Purdue after that. So, that's going to be the thing. Can they win that game in West Lafayette? Because Purdue, this is year 2 with Barry Odom. I think they're going to be improved, but Wake's going to need that if they're going to win a game, if they're going to go to a bowl game. They get Miami after that, chalk that one up as an L. They go to Louisville after that. So I think Wake Forest is sitting 2-2 after 4 games. They get Stanford, NC State on the road. I think they split those. They're 3-3 now. Now you get Cal as a game that you have to win. Get the bye week, Virginia and Mercyhurst. So, of course, I'm going to give them Mercyhurst. So that's 4 wins, I think, that you could pencil in for Wake. So then it comes down to Georgia Tech and Duke for them to make a bowl game. This Miami roster is crazy. The only question that I have is after losing Bain, Messador, Keontae Scott, and more, is it going to take a game or 2 to get adjusted? I think their defense is going to be good. This is not their defense is going to fall off the map comment, but I just think that it might take a minute. And that's why it's great that Miami has the schedule that they have, with FAMU, in week 2, for example. That's good scheduling on their part, unlike my Seminoles. They open at Stanford, so you got to feel 4-0 right there. 4-0 off top. Like I said, Clemson, Florida State, the rivalry game, y'all should beat Florida State, all honesty. It is a rivalry game. Florida State does have a 21-20 record at Miami, so that's always a thing. You get Pitt at home. Carolina, we just talked about the South Bend game. Like I said, this schedule sets up for Miami. If Miami's not 11-1, at the very least, you know what I mean? They should be 12-0 probably. But if they're not 11-1 at least, something's wrong. But so Stanford, improved last year, and now they're starting all over again. Troy Taylor 2 years ago had the issues, got fired for his discipline practices. They brought in Frank Reich last year. Didn't look half bad. Hey, beat Florida State. But Frank Reich had them all right. The last time Stanford had a winning season was 2018. In 2018, I still had a little bit of hair. LeBron was in Cleveland, and I was still in the Air Force just promoting the E7. So Tavita Pritchard is taking over at head coach. He was Andrew Luck's friend and backup. Andrew Luck is the GM there, of course. Stanford has money. And if you just look across the scope of sports, Stanford wins titles in other sports. But they're so focused on academics sometimes that football just kind of gets left behind. I think we're going to see that change now with Andrew Luck in the seat. So with all that being said, they went 4-8 last year. They did beat Cal last year. They also lost to Hawaii, who they opened with this year, Mike Alejado. So there you go, saying you get them at home this time, though. So I'm going to give you that. Obviously, you get blasted by Miami. I think you lose to Duke and Georgia Tech. Wake becomes a toss-up. Lose to Notre Dame. Beat Elon. Lose to NC State and Louisville. Bye week, lose to Tech. Cal's a toss-up. So, unfortunately, I see Cal about 4 games again. Stanford about 4 wins again. Davis Warren, how about that for a name? At quarterback for Stanford this year. Matt Rose on defense. Keep your eye on him. You'll wonder why he's on Stanford. Closing it out with BC. So if there's another coach in the ACC that's going to get fired this year, the first assumption being Mike Norvell, it's got to be Bill O'Brien. BC is a proud football program. They went 1-11 last year. 2-10 last year. And he started 4-1 when he took over. Since then, they're 5-15. They had a lot of injuries last year, but they threw the ball well. They lost to Sparty and Cal and Georgia Tech, so all 3 of them combined 8 points. So they weren't far off the mark. And if you go back and look at the Notre Dame game last year, BC gave Notre Dame everything they wanted. That could have been that performance by Notre Dame could have been one of those games that kept them out the playoff. said unless they weren't going to get in anyway with the loss to Miami. So BC lost Turbo Richard. He's with the national champs now. But it's not over. They brought in a great running back from Liberty, Mr. Dickens. He was 9th in the nation, 1,339 yards, 3rd in rushing yards per game. So the BC offense needs physicality. He will give them that. He averages 3.8 yards after contact. So there you go. The problem for BC, it's all about the trenches, right? They lost all 5 starters from the offensive line from a team that already went 2-10. This could get bleak and ugly real quick. We'll get to that. I think that Bill O'Brien's a good coach. I do. One of them is your GM. You remember the whole DeAndre Hopkins debacle. But as a head coach, he was the one that took over Penn State in the midst of that scandal and set it up for James Franklin. So I do think he's a good coach. They got more terrible news yesterday. Kalen Chudzinski, the tight end, tore his Achilles. Was probably going to be a top 2 or 3 tight end in the ACC this year, in my opinion. BC struggles with playmaking. I think Dickens will help that. But think about this. How many offensive players, great offensive players, can you think of that came from BC that are in the NFL? You got A.J. Dillon. Zay Flowers was the first or the only, he's the only wide receiver they had drafted in the last 30 years. That tells you what we're dealing with here. Ted Roof in as the defensive coordinator. They have more changeover than Colorado. So it's just a mess going on in Chestnut Hill. KC Price, the leader of the defense, safety, he's back, so that's a positive. But looking at the schedule, right? And this is another one of those schedules where you got to win the games that you can win. Can you beat Cincinnati? Can you beat Rutgers? Now, Cincinnati's going to be tough because regardless of how good or bad Cincinnati is, it's tough to go into Nippert Stadium. And I know y'all think that's a joke, but I'm being dead serious. It's hard to go to Nippert Stadium, right? So Rutgers, Maine, okay. So if you can start 2-1, because it's going to get bad, Virginia Tech at SMU, Pitt after the bye week. Georgia Tech should have whatever they're going to be figured out by the time you get them on October 24th. Duke. Then you get Florida State and Notre Dame back-to-back. The good news is, for you maybe, is that depending on what Florida State's doing, either Norvell's going to be out or the team has quit. So you might get a lame duck Florida State team coming into Chestnut Hill when it gets a little breezy outside. You go to South Bend. You got to beat Syracuse, and then you're going to lose at Miami. So looking at this, it's hard for me to find 4 or more than 4 wins. And that's still going off of the premise of not having a great offensive line. You know what I mean? So, Cincinnati's a toss-up. Rutgers should beat you. You should lose to Rutgers, but I'll call Rutgers a toss-up because I don't know what's going on with Greg Schiano. Rutgers still hasn't gotten past that corner just yet. You got to beat Maine, obviously. And then I don't see another win potentially until we see what Duke looks like. And then maybe Syracuse, depending on where they are. It's going to be tough sledding for BC. But one last thing before we get out of here. There's been talks about Texas Tech, public enemy number 1 or 2, depending on how you feel about Lane Kiffin, that they could be joining the ACC or talking to the ACC at some point. So the ACC is at a crossroad anyway. Texas Tech ain't going anywhere. And if they are, it ain't the ACC. I tell you that. You know why? Because what is the ACC in 5 years? Now, you already saw Florida State and Clemson take the ACC to court. Those aren't even the 2 schools that you should be most worried about. Because if you're looking at the Big Ten, their record of academics, you got to look at North Carolina. You got to look at Georgia Tech. You got to look at Virginia. You got to look even at Miami to some degree. So why would you – the Big 12 has more stability than the ACC. and probably will for some time, because if the ACC does fall apart, you might see Louisville go over there. And I've been maintaining this. You're sitting at 17 teams. You have the agreement with Notre Dame. You got your conference playing, 8 games, teams playing 9 games. Just call Memphis. Call South Florida already. And I know Memphis is sick watching Louisville, being that they were peers and on the same level in Cincinnati. But I just had to say that real quick. But we will be back on Tuesday to preview the Big Ten. National champion Indiana. Can they keep it going? I am 2-5, your unorthodox statistician, reporting to you live from the Alamo. And for Mr. Logical, we love y'all. Thanks for your support. Like, review, subscribe, share, rate, do all the free things, do all the good things. Liquid death better be in your hand, right? See you on Tuesday. Sports Reports is ordered. Out.
Sports reports, no gimmicks, no clowns. 2-5, Mr. Logical, we run this town. Real talk only, no chasing, no doubt. From the east to the west, it's the order we shout. Mic check, lights flash, game time, stay ready. 2 vets in the zone, keep the pressure real heavy. Big hits, big plays, yeah, we breaking it down. Truth rings in your speakers, every word is the crown. From the north side hustle to that southern flame. Midwest grind, west coast of the game. Sports talk kings, yeah, we wear that crown. Turn it up, let them know it's about to go down. Sports reports, no gimmicks, no